Hey guys, tonight we're taking a slow, fog-soaked walk into the past. Tonight, we sink boots first into the grimy, chaotic, deeply unforgiving streets of Victorian England. You step out of the present and the first thing you face is a wall of grey fog, except it isn't really fog. It's smoke and soot and whatever else the factories coughed up that day. You inhale, and your lungs immediately file a complaint. You probably won't survive this, but hey, it's all about the experience, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And also comment your location and your local time. It's always satisfying to see from where are you tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive with modern shoes, a phone that instantly stops working, and a confused expression that attracts suspicion faster than you can say Wi-Fi. You step onto cobblestones, slick with rain and unidentifiable substances, and horse manure adds an aroma you can't swipe away. Carriages rattle, drivers curse, and the clop 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 of hooves becomes the soundtrack to your slow, disoriented march. 10 minutes into the 1800s, and your sneakers are ruined. The first thing you notice is the noise constant, overlapping, relentless. Street vendors bark prices in competing yells, chimney sweeps tumble out of alleys covered in soot like tiny ghosts, and beggars stretch out hands that look like they've shaken hands with sandpaper. A well-dressed gentleman strides past confidently, cane tapping, hat shining, ignoring the mother sitting on the curb with a baby wrapped in what appears to be a curtain. Victorian England is many things, but subtle isn't one of them. The second thing you notice is that everyone is staring at you, your clothes, your posture, the fact you keep stepping aside politely to let people go first. Courtesy in Victorian London is more like a contact sport. People bump, shove, and elbow their way through. You politely smile, big mistake, because smiling without context is apparently suspicious. You're now the weird one. Historians still argue whether the Great Stink of London, yes, that was its real name, was caused more by sewage overflow or industrial runoff. But the nose-wrinkling truth is, the river was basically soup. You stroll along the Thames thinking you're about to enjoy a scenic waterfront walk. Instead, you gag. The river doesn't gently flow, it sloshes like a cauldron of despair. And if you're wondering what that brown foam is, don't. Trust me, don't. A quirky little tidbit? Some people genuinely believed bad smells themselves caused disease, which isn't entirely off. But the solution often involved carrying flowers or vinegar-soaked sponges close to their nose. Imagine walking with a bouquet just to survive the commute. You, with your clean handkerchief and faint smell of modern detergent, look suspiciously wealthy to some and suspiciously foreign to others. And wealth, or the appearance of it, makes you a target. Someone brushes past you a little too close, and in that brief contact, your now decorative phone has evaporated. Congratulations, you've just been pickpocketed by a child who could probably beat you at chess and then steal the board. Victorian thieves train young, work in teams, and vanish before you finish turning around. You try to chase, but your lungs remind you the air is solid. You spot what looks like a police officer, tall hat and all, and you approach for help until you remember police forces are new, underpaid, and sometimes more corrupt than the criminals. The officer looks you up and down with suspicion. You realize he thinks you might be the problem after all, who carries a tiny glass rectangle with no engravings. A spy, perhaps? A foreign agent? Or worst of all, someone from a rival neighborhood? You back away carefully and decide blending in is your best strategy. You wander toward a marketplace, thinking the safest place is where people gather. Wrong again. Crowds in Victorian London aren't safety, they're chaos, fenced in by desperation. Stalls overflow with bruised vegetables, questionable meat, and things labelled food only by technicality. You hear someone yell about fresh fish, even though the fish looks like it died during the last monarch's reign. A butcher slams a cleaver with gusto, and you swear the table wobbles in fear. If you look wealthy, you're a target. If you look poor, you're invisible. There is no middle ground. A man with stained gloves shouts something about patent medicines, claiming his bottles cure everything from cough to heartbreak. You think the cure-all fad is just a scam, and you're right. But back then, medicine was basically the Wild West. The liquid he's selling might be opium, chloroform, or crushed beetles mixed with optimism. You see a small crowd gathered around a street performer swallowing swords real, not toy versions, and the audience applauds with a tired look that says, "Entertain us, life is exhausting." You clap politely, then realize clapping makes you look like you have time and energy suspicious again. Someone coughs near you, a wet, rattling cough that echoes off brick. It's a cough you've only heard in historical documentaries, and suddenly the reality sinks in. Tuberculosis, cholera, typhoid. Victorian England collects diseases like trading cards. And the air? Already filling your lungs with the ingredients for a souvenir infection. You instinctively reach for hand sanitizer, but it might as well be imagination. Soap exists, yes, but not the mint-fresh, clean fantasy you know. Hands are washed mostly when dirty becomes unacceptable and the threshold is high. You realize navigation is impossible without landmarks, but everything looks the same. Brick, soot, smoke. You catch sight of Big Ben, except it doesn't exist yet. You're early, so you ask someone for directions. They look confused because your accent might as well be alien. You try again slower now, you just sound like you're insulting their intelligence. Good job you've survived 33 minutes. You lean against a wall to catch your breath and immediately regret it. The wall leaves a mark on your sleeve the color of despair. You try wiping it with your hand, and now your hand matches. You consider crying, but the tears would probably leave streaks. The city pulsing around you feels alive, not in the welcoming, vibrant sense, in the sense of a creature that doesn't care whether you make it to morning. And while movies paint this era with corsets and violins, you, standing ankle-deep in mud that might not be mud, begin to understand the truth. Victorian England isn't designed for comfort, it's designed for survival. You take another breath a mistake, because the air tastes like burnt metal and chimney afterthoughts. You squint upward through the haze, searching for the sun, but it's a ghostly, butter-yellow disk smudged behind industrial smog. Victorian London doesn't just have bad air, it weaponizes it. Every inhale scratches the back of your throat like sandpaper dipped in coal dust, leaving a bitter coat you can't swallow away. Your nose stings, your eyes water, and suddenly nostalgia hits for the harmless pollution of your daily traffic commute. Smokestacks jut across the skyline like jagged teeth, chomping the sky into murk. They never stop. Factories run day and night, churning out iron, steel, cloth, and lung failure. The city moves by steam, but the price is suffocation. You watch workers emerge from a textile mill, coughing, hunched silhouettes with collars blackened by soot. Shirts that started the day, white now resemble charcoal sketches. And as you exhale, you realize the smog isn't leaving your body, it's staying rent-free, a long-term tenant you never agreed to. A mainstream historical fact. This era gave birth to the term P, super, fog so thick and green it could blind horses mid-stride. Engines stopped, carriages crashed, people genuinely lost their way walking home. Whole neighborhoods disappeared inside clouds of industrial darkness. You wave your hand in front of your face and barely see fingertips. The air has density, you breathe it, chew it, wear it. Victorian citizens treat it like weather. Bit thick today, someone says casually, while hacking into a handkerchief already patterned with brown stains. That handkerchief probably has its own ecosystem. The quirky tidbit? Some believed smog improved your health, especially the wealthy. They sold tiny bottles of London fog as souvenirs, convinced the gritty air built character or strengthened lungs. You could almost laugh if you weren't choking. You cough hard, and it echoes embarrassingly loud. Heads turn. Here, coughing is as common as blinking. Yours sounds too clean, too modern, too sterile. A woman narrows her eyes suspiciously. She probably thinks you're one of those wealthy outsiders who come to mock the working class. Appearance matters in ways that aren't flashy, they're survival-coded. You notice buildings covered in grime like they've been dipped in burnt sugar. Black streaks drip down walls where rain has etched tears into brick. Clotheslines stretch between windows like truce flags in a citywide battle against dirt. Even clean laundry looks tired before it finishes drying. And somewhere nearby, a boiler releases a hiss of steam that sounds alarmingly like the sigh of a giant creature hidden in the fog. Historians still argue whether the rapid industrial boom was progress or an environmental disaster written in smoke. Progress gave jobs, yes, but at the cost of breathing normally something you took for granted, like Wi-Fi, sleep schedules, and salad made of things that grew in soil instead of soot. You cover your mouth with your sleeve, not that it helps. The smoke laughs at fabric. It creeps through wool, cotton, skin. You're tasting coal, ingesting coal, becoming coal. You're basically a walking barbecue without the fun part. Your hair picks up the scent immediately. One afternoon stroll and you smell like you've been working the night shift in a train engine. The city brands you like property. It presses itself into your pores, reminding you that leaving won't wash it off quickly. A horse pulling a delivery wagon snorts loudly, stamping angrily at the ground. Even animals protest the atmosphere. The driver pats its neck like comforting a friend going through something they'll never emotionally recover from. The smog drifts low, hugging the streets, swallowing the silhouettes of children running barefoot, coats too large, laughter too brief. You see a group of them playing with a hoop, until one stops to cough so long you count seconds. When the coughing fit ends, he resumes playing like nothing happened. Because here, coughing is part of childhood like chalk drawings and scraped knees, except both the drawings and knees are black with soot. You squint up at the cloud churn again and realize something uncanny: there are no birds in the air. Think about that. Victorian skies weren't filled with fluttering wings and morning songs. They were silent prisons where birds got lost, sick, or simply didn't bother flying. Someone pushes past you, not rudely, just normally because personal space hasn't been invented. You see their collar and wonder, is the fabric grey? Or was it once white? It's fashioned by force, colour by consequence. You step around a puddle that looks suspiciously rainbow-tinted. Oil? Something worse? Hard to say. The puddle bubbles. You walk faster. The air gets thicker the closer you move to factory blocks. Machinery clatters from within like angry giants demanding payment in blood, sweat, and respiratory systems. Smoke erupts rhythmically, each plume a reminder that every second in this era shaves something off your life expectancy. Something small, like 5 minutes, or a decade. Someone lights a pipe, because when the environment resembles a smoker's lounge, why not double down? Smoke on smoke. The scent of burning tobacco mixes with coal fumes until your brain stops trying to differentiate the flavors. Another quirky detail. Wealthy Victorians sometimes believed gentle exposure to polluted air hardened the constitution like seasoning a cast iron pan. You never realize how optimistic humans can be until you watch them justify poison. You hear the distant clanging of metal on metal shipbuilding yards, perhaps the sound echoing like a monotonous heartbeat of the age. This city doesn't sleep, it smoulders. You rub your eyes, but rubbing only grinds soot deeper. Tears form partly emotional, mostly chemical, and roll down your cheeks like tiny rivers making canals through grey dust. You sniff. Mistake. More air enters. The cycle continues. A woman selling roasted chestnuts smiles at you. Smoke rises from her cart, blending with the atmospheric soup. Warm food, cooked over open flame, contributing another layer to the aromatic apocalypse. You consider buying one for warmth, fire, and smoke now comfort you, because relativism works fast when the baseline is misery. As you walk farther, you notice signs posted by concerned local councils. Warnings about smoke inhalation, suggested burning hours to reduce smog. People ignore them. Work doesn't pause for breathers. Progress can't take a sick day. Children drag coal buckets twice their size. Fathers limp home with blackened beards. Mothers shake out rugs that explode clouds of dust so large they form temporary weather patterns. Victorian England has conquered air. And now, it's conquering your lungs. Your chest feels tight, heavier with each breath, a weight you didn't earn, but inherited the moment you stepped into this era. You realize, this air isn't just inconvenient, it's lethal on a delay timer. And that timer, it just started counting down. You walk only a few blocks well. Blocks is generous. Let's call them winding, chaotic tangles of streets that appear designed by someone holding a pen with their elbows. You wander deeper into the bowels of Victorian London, and as the smog settles behind you, something new rises like a wall. Class. And here, class is not a vibe, not an aesthetic, not something your outfit can fake. It is iron-forged identity, decided before you speak, and tattooed beneath your skin by circumstance. You open your mouth to ask someone for directions again, but your accent is wrong, your tone is wrong, your teeth are suspiciously straight, And the fact you aren't missing one signals you clearly did not grow up around here. In Victorian society, class isn't just the gap between rich and poor. It is a gulf, a canyon, a void so deep Sherpas would refuse to guide you across. The moment you stand still long enough for someone to observe you, they categorize you like a biological specimen. Too clean to be a laborer, too confused to be wealthy, too quiet to be a drunk, too alert to be a vagrant. You are an unclassifiable creature, and that means danger. A mainstream historical fact drops quietly into your mind as you walk. Only a small percentage of Victorians actually lived the elegant life we picture. Grand balls, liveried servants, polished shoes. Most lived day to day, paycheck to loaf of bread. And the poor? They lived hour to hour, illness to coin, chance to catastrophe. You watch a well-dressed couple glide past, the woman balancing parasol and posture like she's floating, the man steering her like he owns both the street and the air resting above it. Their boots are polished enough to reflect faces that mirror indifference, eyes forward, never down. Down is where need lives. Down is where danger stares back. A small cluster of onlookers huddle near a newspaper boy, shouting headlines faster than the ink can dry. Something about Parliament, something about a scandal, something about a railway disaster. People buy papers. Not because they crave news, but because class means knowing what others assume you should know. You pat your pockets empty. The pickpocket from earlier congratulates himself from a nearby rooftop, probably. Even money is class-coded. Coins jingle differently depending on their material. Here, wealth has a sound. And you? You don't make that sound anymore. You wander toward a row of shops expecting maybe window displays of goods. Instead, you find barriers literal and invisible. A gold-trimmed storefront displays clocks so intricate they might as well run on magic. The shopkeeper sees you approaching, squints, and without moving, decides you aren't a customer. The door doesn't need to be locked, because class itself is a lock. Next door, a bakery emits warm scents that clash violently with the cold reality of your empty pocket. People line up for bread. Not pastries bread. Flour, yeast, survival. A mother counts coins twice, then asks the baker, voice small, if prices will drop next week. He shrugs with a businessman's apathy. Her face tightens disappointment, age to expectation. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind. Some Victorians used bread not just as food, but as a cleaning tool, kneading dough over fabric to lift dirt. The same loaf that keeps you alive might also wipe soot off your Sunday clothes. Bread is multi-purpose, like that survival kit disguised as breakfast. Class follows you like a shadow, or maybe you've become its shadow. A beggar leans against a wall with familiar resignation, shaking a tin cup that contains optimism in small metallic doses. Another man, slightly better dressed, but only slightly, leans beside him, not begging, just existing. Here, one layer of dirt separates dignity from desperation. You overhear two factory workers discussing wages, if you can call exchanging pennies for exhaustion, wages. Their hands are scarred from looms and gears that don't care whether fingers stay attached. They laugh anyway, the kind of laughter that keeps people sane, because the alternative is screaming. Historians still argue whether the Victorian class system helped maintain order, or simply disguised oppression with etiquette and lace. Maybe both. Structure can feel safe, until you're on the wrong floor of the hierarchy, which, congratulations, you are. You think maybe education could be a ticket upward. Nice thought. Except school is a privilege, and even literacy hangs its hat in the parlours of the financially blessed. The poor often learn by necessity, not curriculum. They read signs to survive, not novels to dream. You turn a corner and freeze. Ahead stands a massive townhouse columns, steps, polished doorknob, reflecting a version of you that already looks defeated. Behind that door, families dine with silverware and servants bringing warm dishes that don't require scraping mould. Music plays, laughter floats, and arguments probably revolve around inheritance or marriage reputations, luxury problems. Across the street, separated only by horse tracks and fate, sits a boarding house, a stack of rooms rented by the desperate, the hopeful, the transient. There, 10 people share one space. Babies cry while men snore, women mend, children cough. Privacy is fantasy, sleep is optional, life is compressed. This city is engineered like a pyramid, and you just discovered your place, near the foundation, holding weight without recognition. You attempt friendliness, a nod, a soft hello, but niceties are also class-coded. Too familiar, and you're disrespectful. Too polite, and you're mocking. Too quiet, and you're suspicious. Too loud, and you're threatening. You can't win. The street grows busier, louder, harsher. A carriage roars past, splashing something you pray is only water onto your clothes. People move with momentum that has nothing to do with direction and everything to do with survival. You're a pebble in a river. They don't flow around you, they push through you. And you realize, without needing an encyclopedia, Victorian society doesn't give you a moment to breathe through the smog or the fear or the confusion. You're not just out of place. You are categorized instantly, permanently, and silently. Here, class isn't earned. It's endured, and you're already losing. You don't walk into the slums, you ooze into them, like the city itself is filtering the population by gravity, letting the poorest slide downhill into the damp, shadowed crevices. The streets narrow until carriages avoid them altogether, leaving behind only feet, bare or broken-soled, to navigate terrain that resembles a battlefield trampled by life and defeat. The smell hits first rotting food, human waste, animals that died here and were never escorted anywhere more respectful. The scent becomes a character. It walks with you, talks with you, clings to your jacket like a needy acquaintance. Your shoes they gave up 2 sections ago now protest every step. Mud isn't mud. Puddles aren't water. And you quickly learn that Victorian slums are less neighbourhood and more shared struggle under architectural neglect. Roofs sag like tired shoulders, bricks crumble like stale bread, and wood frames swell from perpetual moisture that never fully dries, because sunlight here is a rumour, not a guarantee. As you move deeper, buildings begin leaning toward each other, not charmingly like European postcards, more like exhausted co-workers who are too tired to stand straight. Gaps between houses narrow enough that even light negotiates entry. You sometimes hear laughter, not cheerful, but coping. Other times you hear anger, desperation, arguments muffled behind thin walls and thinner privacy. A mainstream historical fact. In parts of Victorian London, multiple families, sometimes more than 60 individuals, shared a single house meant originally for one household. The word crowded feels too polite, too manageable. This is packed, stacked breathing room sold separately. You witness a hallway where people literally sleep standing up, leaning against each other, because floor space is already rented. You pass a staircase, missing more steps than it contains, and someone advises, "Use your hands, love." Victorian architecture is less ADA compliant and more, if it collapses, it collapses. Inside one cramped room, a woman rocks a baby, humming a lullaby off-key not for lack of talent, but for lack of energy. Her voice is worn, patched like her clothes. The child's blanket is more holes than fabric, yet it's pulled tight like armor against the cold. You cough again, involuntary, and instantly regret it, not because of the pain, but because coughing says something here. Weakness, illness, vulnerability. The people glance with a mix of pity and calculation. If you die, space frees up. You see laundry strung overhead. The shirts wave like surrender flags, except they're so stained, surrender might be optimistic. A curious detail, quirky in context. Some poorer families washed clothes by stomping them in buckets with their feet, because soap cost money and hands needed rest for survival. Laundry day doubled as exercise and endurance. As you walk farther, you hear rats plural and confident. They rule these parts like furry landlords, charging rent through intimidation. A large one dashes across your path carrying something that used to be edible. It pauses, assesses you, and continues. Even rats know you don't belong. A child approaches, eyes bright but body thin as pencil lines. He asks if you're lost. You say yes, he laughs, because here, everyone is lost. Direction is a luxury. Purpose arrives only in small temporary doses. A job for a day, a coin here and there, a miracle if you're lucky. Another child, older, carries coal dust on her face like makeup. She waves with 2 fingers because the others are bandaged. Childhood here is negotiable, Most kids trade it for survival before they understand the trade. You offer a sympathetic look. Sympathy doesn't translate to food. You turn down a narrow passage, crusted with the memory of rain and waste, and find people gathered around a water pump, the neighborhood lifeline. You recognize the cobalt blue paint indicating it's safe, though safe is relative. Water trickles slowly, and people hold their containers with reverence. A mother dips a cloth to clean her baby's face. Moments later, you watch another family use the same water to rinse potatoes. You don't ask questions. Here, questions are luxuries too. Historians still argue whether slum conditions caused the high disease rates or merely amplified them. But you don't need historians. Your lungs, your skin, your instincts already know the answer. This environment grows illness like crops, and harvest season never ends. You hear the faint sound of an argument upstairs. Tempers rise quickly in rooms without air or escape. Then laughter erupts, explosive, cathartic, necessary. People learn to share moods like oxygen tanks, passing one breath at a time. A woman sells pie from a tin tray meat, she claims. You don't ask which animal, or if it was alive this week. You learned from the great stink conversation earlier, some questions aren't meant to be answered. In the corner, a man tunes a makeshift violin, its strings mismatched, its bow frayed. He plays surprisingly beautifully, and for a moment the slum transforms. Music cuts through smell, through damp, through judgment. Sound becomes sanctuary. For 30 seconds, life feels suspended, softened. Then a child coughs, heavily, and reality crashes back. You step over a broken floorboard and nearly fall into a space between house and earth. A gap filled with trash, newspapers, and memories thrown away because they smelled worse kept inside. The city doesn't clean these areas. Rain tries, but even nature seems exhausted. Your shoulders brush walls that feel alive with mold. You wipe plaster dust from your sleeve, mistake, because underneath the dust is moisture. Under moisture is smell. Under smell is permanence. The slums leave fingerprints on you, not the other way around. Yet, in this suffocating place, resilience thrives like stubborn weeds pushing through brick. Neighbors share soup because none of them wants to watch someone starve. They share stories because stories are immune to infection. They share silence because sometimes silence says, I understand. Walking out isn't easy, there's no clear exit, physically or metaphorically. This place bends time. Minutes stretch like laundry ropes. Hours sag like ceilings. Days grow moss. When you finally emerge back into broader streets, where the air is slightly less offensive and the noise shifts from survival to commerce, you don't sigh with relief. You inhale responsibility because once you've seen the slums, the rest of the city feels complicit. And you? You're starting to realize Victorian England doesn't just make you uncomfortable. It reshapes you with grit, with grime, with truth you can't unsee. Food, water, necessities so basic you barely think twice today. But Victorian England treats them like roulette, and you're sitting at the table with no chips left. Hunger here isn't a dramatic plot point. It's the background hum of daily life. A stomach growling isn't embarrassing. It's musical accompaniment. You head down a street where vendors are shouting loud enough to scrape the soot off buildings. Each stall makes extravagant promises. Fresh fish, beautiful vegetables, fine meats, and yet everything looks like it lost a fight. You examine a piece of fruit that resembles a science experiment halfway through mutation. The grocer gives you a glare as if judging your standards. He's right in this era. Scrutiny is suspicious. Hunger is wisdom. A mainstream historical fact slides into view as you watch a butcher hoist something onto a hook. Victorians used borax, salt, and even chalk dust to freshen spoiled food, making it look more edible than it was. That healthy white sheen on bread might be ingredients never approved for digestion unless you count the rats who feast after hours. You observe a woman dipping her vegetables into a bucket of water. You step closer and instantly regret the decision. The water is grey, opaque, floating with what might be leaves, might be dirt, might be leftovers of everything washed before it. Drinking water in Victorian England is basically gambling, and cholera is the house. Historians still argue whether contaminated wells or river waste triggered the deadliest cholera outbreaks, but you don't need academic consensus. Just watch people refill their jugs upstream while sewage floats lazily behind them. The Thames wasn't a river, it was a biography of waste. You pass a street vendor selling milk, quotes fully intended, because the milk has been watered down so many times, it's basically hydration with dairy trauma. To improve colour, sellers sometimes added plaster powder. Calcium? Sort of. Edible? Not really. You sip it joking no, you wouldn't dare. This era already hates you. No need to ingest resentment. A quirky tidbit arrives with a hiss of a nearby cart. Coal tar was once used as food colouring, making candy bright and deadly. Children suck on treats that glow like they're radioactive and, in a poetic twist, some probably were. Sugar was expensive, so cheap substitutes were mixed with sawdust. Yes, sawdust. Kids develop sweet tooths and gastrointestinal sawmills simultaneously. Night settles over the city, like a heavy cloak. Not the peaceful kind that invites sleep, but the kind that hides intentions and regrets. Gas lamps flicker to life along the streets, puddles capturing their reflections like trembling gold coins. Shadows stretch long, clever, and bold. You think the worst of the day is behind you, but in Victorian England, social rules are sharper than blades, and missteps wound just as deeply. You stop at a corner, observing people move with an elegance that looks rehearsed. Their posture, gestures, even how they hold their scarves, everything, choreographed by a rule book no one handed you. You clear your throat to ask for directions, but the sound comes out too loud, improper for evening streets. A couple glances at you, offended by your volume. The quiet here isn't peace. It's etiquette applied like varnish. A mainstream historical fact. Victorian society created more than 100 written and unwritten etiquette rules covering how to sit, speak, dine, greet, and even breathe gracefully. A wrong gesture didn't get you a polite correction. It got you silent exile. You attempt to nod at a passer-by, but your nod is too casual. You stand with hands in pockets improper. You smile at a stranger forward. You move aside to let someone pass unnecessary for your class rank, apparently. Every instinct you have acquired in modern life is a mistake here. Even language requires calibration. Slang brands you uneducated. Directness brands you rude. Compliments must be gentle, vague, nearly poetic. You tell someone their hat looks nice, too blunt. Instead, you should say something like, "Your hat complements the season admirably." You try it once. The result is confusion sprinkled with suspicion. You walk into a tea shop, hoping warmth and familiarity will ease the discomfort. Inside, the quiet clinking of china sounds like percussion. People sip delicately, fingers positioned as though holding the cup wrong might result in legal consequences. A server glances at you and asks, "Black tea or Earl Grey?" You answer too quickly, too casually. Your lack of hesitation implies lack of refinement. When the tea arrives, you stir it absent-mindedly mistake. Stirring should be a gentle back-and-forth motion, not circular. You sip without cooling mistake again. Temperature patience equals virtue. Victorian etiquette isn't a suggestion, it's an identity badge. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind. Some etiquette manuals advise that women should laugh without showing teeth, a standard that would reduce any comedy club to silence. The idea was to appear contained, controlled, barely human if required. You exit the tea shop feeling like you broke more laws than rules. You try the street again, adopting stiff posture, measured steps, face neutral, the Victorian NPC walk. It feels like wearing someone else's skin. The pressure intensifies when you encounter people who clearly outrank you socially. The upper class moves like swans on the Thames. Before you learned what floated in that river, their speech is soft, rounded, dripping with confidence, aged like wine. Their clothes aren't cleaner. They're louder in quiet ways. Subtle embroidery, carefully chosen fabrics. Silk that catches lamplight like gossip catches ears. You accidentally make eye contact the wrong kind. Not deferential, not fleeting, but equal. Equal is an illusion. Victorian society resents deeply. Historians still argue whether Victorian etiquette was designed to protect societal order or simply to remind everyone of their place. Was it decorum or domination? Civility or control? A polished cage often distracts from its bars. You try to ask someone a question. "Excuse me, could you tell me?" But you're cut off. Not because they're rude, but because status grants the power to ignore. You're not rude. You're invisible. Except you're not invisible to everyone. You accidentally bump shoulders with a man who turns abruptly. You mutter, "Sorry," like reflex. He pauses, offended, because apologies are class-coded. In some circles, offering one implies you were wrong, and being wrong is socially unacceptable. He stares a moment longer, then dismisses you. You learn something else. In Victorian England, courtesy is currency, and you have the exchange rate of a rock. Dinner invitations are battlegrounds. Seating charts are political strategies. Visiting someone unannounced is social violence. You overhear a conversation where a woman discusses another's scandal, not theft, not crime, but the horror that she served the wrong utensil with dessert. Reputations collapse faster than tenement roofs. A gust of cool air whistles through the street, the kind that makes you instinctively zip your jacket. But jackets here have buttons and patience. You fumble with them inelegantly, marking yourself again as foreign, untrained, suspicious. Etiquette follows you even in silence. If you walk too fast, you appear frantic, too slow, lazy. If you look up at architecture, you look naive. If you look down, defeated. Straight ahead is the only safe place to aim your eyes, but even your gaze must convey purpose, but not ambition, confidence without pride, humility without weakness. It's exhausting being socially acceptable. You pass a grand house where carriages line up to deliver guests to an evening event. Through lace curtains you glimpse gloved hands holding glasses, heads tipping just so, smiles placed like decorative centerpieces. Laughter floats outward, not belly laughter, but polite exhalations of air shaped like amusement. Inside that glowing room, status is a performance art. Outside, people like you freeze in cold shadows because the only thing harsher than winter wind is exclusion. Victorian England doesn't physically strike you in its etiquette. It erodes you. Quietly, firmly, consistently, like water carving stone. From the slums to the dining rooms, the rule is constant. Everything you do says who you are, and here, what you are isn't enough. And as you drift farther from the warmth of lamplight, trying to mimic a society choreographed by unwritten scripts, the truth settles softly, like ash on stitched clothing. Surviving Victorian England isn't just about food, air, and crime. It's about never being the wrong person in the wrong place, making the wrong gesture at the wrong time. And in this era, you're always one mistake away from being unwelcome. You continue walking, letting the cold night pinch your cheeks and the dim gaslights guide your steps. The streets have thinned, the noise softened, yet the weight of expectation hasn't lifted. It presses on your shoulders like a wool coat soaked in rain. But now your eyes adjust to a sharper truth. Victorian England isn't the same experience for everyone. The rules, the dangers, the very definition of existence changes depending on whether you are a woman. You pass a row of houses where curtains shift subtly silhouettes framed in flickering lamplight. Inside, women sit with posture straight enough to balance an entire tea set. Their hands move with quiet precision, mending, embroidering, pouring. Skills that look delicate but come with heavy consequence. Being a woman here means being seen and not heard except when being heard is required, praised, then promptly dismissed. A mainstream historical fact lands quietly in your mind. Victorian women could not vote, own property after marriage, or even claim custody of their own children in most circumstances. Rights weren't lost. They were never granted, locked behind social expectations and legal signatures belonging to fathers, brothers, husbands. You watch as a man escorts his wife along the pavement he leads. She follows half a step behind, not beside. Not because the street is narrow, but because hierarchy is. Her arm threads through his like a tether, and you can't tell if it's comfort or constraint. A woman nearby walks alone carefully, deliberately her gaze lowered but scanning. Alone is suspicious. Alone invites assumptions. A respectable woman must be accompanied. Independence reads as rebellion, or worse, impropriety. You can almost feel the eyes pressing on her back like invisible hands. Victorian England had two archetypes for women, the angel and the cautionary tale. There was little room in between. You overhear a conversation from an open doorway voices, hushed but urgent. A young woman, tearful, being instructed by an older relative. You mustn't be seen speaking to him again. People talk. People talk. Gossip here is a scalpel clean, quiet, precise cutting without blood. Reputations don't bruise, they shatter. Historians still argue whether Victorian moral standards protected women or imprisoned them. Some claim strict etiquette shielded women from social chaos. Others insist it suppressed autonomy so thoroughly that even opinions needed permission. You wander past a dressmaker's shop where mannequins wear corsets like trophies. You've seen corsets romanticized in period dramas, elegant, glamorous, alluring. Up close, they resemble armor, rigid boning, laces pulled tight enough to convince ribs to practice yoga. A quirky detail emerges. Some Victorian corsets were tightened so aggressively they could rearrange organs, leading to fainting, which society found delicate and attractive. Fainting wasn't a medical emergency, it was aesthetic applause. Inside a parlor, women practiced the art of conversation, not in expressing ideas, but delicately circling them. They compliment fabrics, not feelings. They debate weather patterns, not ambitions. Thought must hide behind suggestion. Further along, a girl no older than 16 clutches a stack of books and receives judgmental glances for it. Education is permitted only within acceptable limits. Intelligence in women is admired privately, questioned publicly, feared socially. You peek through a window into a kitchen, where women work with sleeves rolled, chopping, stirring, lifting heavy pots, labor that looks like housework but functions like survival. Domesticity isn't hobby, it's obligation outlined by society and enforced by necessity. And yet, in private corners and hush-filled diaries, women write. They think, they dream, they challenge quietly, subtly, through poems, letters, hidden manuscripts. Some publish under male pseudonyms because only men's names open doors without explanation. The irony of this era is bitter. Women were seen as fragile yet expected to endure everything. You walk toward a poorer district, far from gaslit civility. Here, expectations mutate. Women carry buckets, haul coal, scrub floors until water turns black, sometimes until fingertips bleed. Respectability requires rest. Poverty steals time for performance. You meet a widow selling matches on the corner, her face weathered but eyes steady. Her husband is gone, so is her income. Laws tied her identity to marriage. Death untied everything except responsibility. She offers you a box for a penny, a transaction small enough to summarize survival. You ask if she's managing. She smiles the kind of smile that doesn't travel past the lips. I manage until I don't. Then I manage differently. Her words linger, strong and resigned. Nearby, you see another woman escorted into a police wagon accused of prostitution, though accusation alone is conviction here. She tries to speak, but the officers shut the door before sound escapes. Morality is enforced selectively. Society frowns at women for succumbing to poverty, not at the poverty that cornered them. For women in Victorian England, the path is narrow and mined. Too cheerful, indecent. Too quiet, suspicious. Too ambitious, offensive. Too visible, dangerous. Too invisible, forgotten. You continue walking, And for the first time tonight, it isn't the smog or hunger or crime that tightens your chest. It's understanding, because Victorian England wasn't built for women to succeed. It was built so they could endure silently, beautifully, and break out of sight. You follow the pull of distant music, faint, uneven, carried through alleyways like contraband laughter. The night is alive, not asleep, and Victorian England, after dark, reveals contradictions lit by candle, shadow, and impulse. Entertainment exists, and it thrives, but not in the polished, Instagram-approved way your imagination promised. It survives in pockets of dim-lit rebellion, where enjoyment is whispered, purchased, or hidden behind respectable curtains. You stumble upon a music hall, its chipped paint and flickering sign proudly announcing itself, despite looking as exhausted as its patrons. The moment you step in, the air changes. Smoke curls lazily above heads. Voices collide in messy harmony, and wooden floors vibrate with applause that's equal parts excitement and escape. A woman in a sequin dress, though half the sequins have lost conviction, sings on stage with a voice that could melt glass or break hearts, depending on the verse. People clap loudly here improperly by high society standards, but perfectly in rhythm for souls needing release. You see factory workers, chimney sweeps, widows, sailors, and the occasional gentleman slumming it with the air of someone who will pretend tomorrow he wasn't here. Entertainment is equalizer and divider depending on who spots you. A mainstream historical fact floats in. Music halls became the backbone of urban entertainment in the Victorian era, offering singing, satire, comedy, and escape from relentless work. Performers mocked politicians, mocked etiquette, mocked the wealthy safely, humorously, indirectly. Laughter is rebellion disguised with rhythm. You sit by a wooden table that wobbles like it's had a long life. A server brings ale in a glass that's seen more years than you have scratches, dense and history included. You sip, carefully, because flavour isn't the primary goal here, effect is. Across the room, a group of women dance with practiced smiles and weary eyes. Applause grows genuine, desperate. Entertainment here feels less like leisure and more like therapy that costs a few coins at the door. A quirky tidbit pops up. Victorians loved morbid entertainment, including public lectures on death, spiritualism shows, and seances advertised like theatre. People paid to watch mediums converse with ghosts. You wonder whether the dead charged appearance fees. Speaking of ghosts, the next act takes the stage. A magician, cloak swirling dramatically, introduces illusions with confident theatrics. He disappears coins, transforms scarves, and pulls something furry, maybe alive, from a hat that seems too small. The crowd reacts with wonder, suspicion, delight, three emotions that rarely coexist. Magic thrives in uncertain times because belief becomes bargaining chip. When reality is unbearable, the impossible sells well. Outside, morality patrols wait, not official police, but judgmental glares embodied in neighbours who tally sins based on curtain movement. Entertainment after dark walks a fragile social line. A respectable woman would never enter a music hall unless she disguises herself. A gentleman must pretend attendance is accidental or philanthropic. If someone sees you, it becomes conversation fuel, scorching reputations like grease fire. Historians still argue whether Victorian moral standards genuinely improved society or simply forced vice underground, where it grew teeth. Alcohol consumption didn't disappear under judgment, it adapted, thriving in corners where candles burned low. You leave the music hall and follow voices to a quieter street laughter, mixes with hushed whispers. A door opens briefly, showing velvet drapes and well-dressed patrons sipping expensive drinks. A private club, invitation only, the opposite of the music hall in cost, but not in secrecy. Entertainment for the wealthy comes wrapped in elegance, but shares the same foundation: relief. You continue onward and find children performing acrobatics for coins, One balances on a rope, only slightly higher than his own hopes. He bows dramatically after each trick, because applause is as valuable as pennies. Food stalls offer roasted chestnuts, hot pies, and questionable kebabs. A man sells roasted peanuts, calling them hot nuts, with enthusiasm that suggests this is his artistic contribution to society. You consider buying some hunger wins over caution, and they're surprisingly decent. You savor warmth in your hands as much as flavor on your tongue. As midnight grows teeth, entertainment shifts tone. Laughter becomes sharper, desperate, fueled by ale and exhaustion. Fights ensue quickly and end quicker, resolved by either apology or unconsciousness. You glimpse a woman hurrying home, hood drawn low. Respectability demands she not be seen out late. Safety demands she not be alone. But she is both, and neither condition cares about the other. In wealthier neighborhoods, private soirees unfold behind windows glowing soft gold. Inside, violins sing, and conversations float as lightly as champagne bubbles. Yet gossip here is weaponized and served chilled. A wrong sentence spoken in the wrong company can echo for years. Entertainment and morality are paradoxically intertwined. One thrives because the other restricts. The more rigid the rules, the more enticing the rebellion. Victorian England breathes morality by day and exhales contradiction by night. You walk back into the open street stars hidden by smog, moon blurred like a watercolor painting left in the rain, and realize something. Entertainment in Victorian England isn't leisure. It's relief. It's rebellion. It's survival with rhythm. And whether you attended a music hall, a séance, a private club, or simply listened to street musicians, you participated in the era's greatest contradiction. This society prides itself on restraint, yet needs escape more than sleep. The night deepens, yet the city feels strangely awake, as if London herself refuses to sleep, choosing instead to whisper secrets through chimney smoke and gaslit windows. You follow a group of people carrying candles, their silhouettes flickering like spirits in motion. They walk with purpose, not hurried, not hesitant as though drawn towards something unseen. Curiosity tugs you along behind them. You turn down a quieter road, where the wind hushes and voices soften. At the end of the street stands a townhouse, curtains dark, door cracked open just enough to invite those who already know they belong. Someone guards the entry, not with a uniform or weapon, but with skepticism polished sharp enough to slice. Inside, the air is thick, not with smoke this time, but anticipation. Candles flicker on tables draped in velvet. Chairs form a circle. The room feels theatrical, but reverent, like church for those who lost faith in the world, but haven't given up on something beyond it. A woman sits at the center, hair pinned elegantly, expression calm. She raises her hands, palms outward, fingers poised like antennae, tuned to frequencies invisible. She begins to speak softly, welcoming neighbors seen and unseen. You've just entered a Victorian séance. A mainstream historical fact materializes. Spiritualism surged in popularity during the Victorian era, fueled by high death rates, poor medical science, and grief in constant circulation. Families devastated by loss found hope in candlelit parlors, where mediums promised connection, closure, or at least the illusion of it. Tonight, illusions are oxygen. Participants close their eyes as the medium invokes names, some familiar to people in the room, some likely invented. The table trembles lightly. A glass shifts on its own. Someone gasps. Someone prays. Someone smirks skeptically but doesn't leave. You watch the medium more closely. Her breathing deepens. Her voice drops an octave. She claims a spirit speaks through her. A distant relative. A lost love. A child gone too soon. Hope anchors people more firmly than fact. A quirky detail floats through your thoughts. Victorians often hired photographers to capture images of spirits, double exposures, technical tricks. and cleverly smudged plates created ghostly silhouettes behind grieving families. People framed these photos proudly on mantelpieces, finding comfort in shadows that technology painted. Someone in the circle asks a question, trembling, emotional, wanting to know if her husband forgives her. The medium responds with vagueness disguised as clarity, words that fit any grief like a tailored suit. Tears fall anyway. Historians still argue whether spiritualism was charlatanry, faith expression, or necessary psychological survival. Was it deception or compassion, exploitation or therapy? Perhaps it was all of them simultaneously true and false, like belief itself. You notice something odd outside the séance room. Rational Victorian society mocks superstition. Science booms with invention and discovery. Fact and measurement carry prestige. Yet behind closed parlor doors, the educated and uneducated alike sit with palms open and eyes closed, negotiating with the unseen. Because Victorian England is a contradiction dressed in lace. Death is constant companion, so people seek conversations that medicine and clergy can't provide. Families lose children to illness before they lose baby teeth. Wives bury husbands younger than they are now. Mothers sit with empty laps, long after nursery rooms go silent. In a world where grief is common, belief becomes survival strategy. The medium announces the presence of a spirit with such conviction the room chills, or maybe the draft simply found a path through old brick. Candles flicker dramatically. Someone's chair creaks. A man shudders from fear or performance, uncertain. A book on the side table lists charms, runes, protections. You flip through quickly diagrams drawn with devotion, instructions for keeping spirits out, and others for inviting them in. The line between safety and curiosity blurs. As the séance concludes, the medium thanks the spirits for visiting, as politely as someone might thank neighbors for borrowing sugar. Participants rise slowly, faces calmer, grief temporarily soothed. Outside again, you hear whispers of other superstitions. Omens in bird flight, fortunes told through tea leaves, curses passed through careless words. Even medicine nodded toward mysticism, doctors sometimes relying on folk remedies passed down through generations. The church frowns, scientists scoff, but the heart believes differently than the mind. On the street, you encounter a seller of talismans claiming protection from illness, heartbreak, misfortune, or taxes, the last never proven effective. Amulets hang like promises on a string. You consider buying one not because you believe, but because uncertainty breeds superstition in everyone eventually. Victorian England is a place where progress and fear coexist, walking side by side like estranged siblings forced to share a carriage. Telegraphs transmit words faster than ever, yet people gather to speak with the dead. Railways shrink distance, yet loss feels just as large. You continue walking under a sky that hides its stars behind smoke. Somewhere, a church bell rings. Somewhere else, a medium calls for spirits. Both seek answers neither can fully prove. You realize this century isn't merely haunted by ghosts. It invited them. It entertained them. It depended on them. Because when life offers so little certainty, the afterlife becomes customer service for the unanswered. And belief, real, fake, borrowed or imagined, is sometimes the only medicine people can afford. You continue wandering through the thick veins of the city, and a thought rises like steam from the cobblestones. How is all of this possible? The factories, the wealth, the gowns, the tea, the architecture, even the soot. Victorian England feels like an organism, growing faster than it can comprehend. But organisms need fuel, and the fuel for this empire doesn't originate here. It comes from ports, colonies, and faraway lands, where the sun is rumoured never to set and never to forgive. The Victorian Empire brands itself as a beacon of civilization and progress, wrapped neatly in rhetoric and fine stationery. But when you peel back the parchment, when you see what powers this machine, the ink smells like iron, sweat, and something darker. A mainstream historical fact pushes forward. At its peak, the British Empire controlled nearly 1/4 of the world's land and population. One flag cast a shadow that stretched across continents. That shadow didn't cool, it burned. Goods fill markets here with dazzling variety tea from India and Ceylon, spices from Southeast Asia, cotton from India, sugar from the Caribbean, opium profits crossing silent desks. People sip delicately from fine china teacups, never considering who harvested the leaves or how many hands bled so they could host polite conversation. You see an advertisement promoting tea as a soothing bedtime beverage, a delicate illustration of white-gloved hands pouring from a silver pot. But the truth behind the drawing drips differently. You overhear a trader boasting of new shipments: coffee, tobacco, porcelain, ivory. His tone is pride wrapped in profit. The map he gestures to shows red lines, roots drawn like veins, delivering lifeblood. Except the heart receiving it has no idea what sacrifices kept it beating. Historians still argue whether the empire brought progress or plunder, whether railroads and education justified control, or whether these offerings were polished masks for resource extraction. The debate depends on which side of the ocean the historian stands. You pass a newspaper boy shouting headlines: "War in a territory most Londoners can't pronounce, victory claimed over a people they've never met." Triumph sells papers, defeat sells fear. Either sells. You duck into a dockside district where the air tastes different, saltier, busier, louder. Ships unload crates stacked like giant bricks, each stamped with foreign origins in faded ink. Workers strain to carry them. Unaware they carry more than goods, they carry the weight of an empire's appetite. In a nearby pub, sailors drink loudly, bragging or lamenting voyages. One describes heat so relentless it made the sea boil in their dreams. Another speaks of jungles so thick they swallowed sound and men. They laugh in ways that sound like survival, not humour. A quirky detail surfaces. Victorian exhibitions often displayed artifacts, and sometimes people from colonised regions as curiosities, teaching the public that the empire owned even culture. Families strolled through these displays like zoos of identity. Your stomach tightens when you see posters advertising exotic performances, dancers, storytellers, musicians from captured lands presented as spectacles under the guise of cultural exchange, entertainers or evidence depending on the viewer. The empire's parade of imports doesn't stop at goods or art. Ideas arrive, some welcome, some stolen, some misunderstood. Yet the empire speaks as though it invented what it borrowed. You catch a glimpse of a wealthy household through tall windows. Servants move like ghosts carrying trays. Tea is poured with ceremony. Guests compliment the blend without tasting history. A woman comments on the delightful Indian flavour, unaware or uninterested that entire regions reshaped under imperial command so her evening beverage could exist. Morality here is selective polished silver on the table and tarnish unseen on the supply chain. As you walk, you overhear two men discussing economics. The empire ensures prosperity, one says confidently, swirling his drink. But prosperity is picky. It chooses addresses in neighbourhoods with gas lamps and ignores the alleys where children sleep near soot-stained walls. The poor of England benefit little from the profits extracted. A broad empire trickles upward. Questions form in your mind, heavy and unavoidable. What does progress cost? Who pays? Who profits? But Victorian society rarely entertains these questions aloud. Dinner is served. Conversations must remain appetizing. You turn down a quieter road and encounter missionaries preparing to travel, carrying books, hope, and cultural expectations as luggage. Their intentions feel sincere, but sincerity and impact rarely shake hands. Bringing new beliefs to distant lands offers comfort for some and conflict for others. You see recruitment posters for soldiers, young men encouraged to defend something vast and abstract, land they'll never see. ideals they'll never question, wars fought in service of borders printed on maps without local consent. Empire shapes the city you stand in, its buildings, its economy, its pride. But it also shapes absences, silences, unasked questions. Every street lamp glowing tonight may be powered by coal, mined by families miles underground, but the fuel in the cultural sense is global. Victorian progress is built upon connection, forced, taken, negotiated, but rarely equal. As the night stretches and the docks quiet, you sit on a crate, smelling faintly of spices and sea. You finally acknowledge that Victorian England doesn't exist alone. It stands on shoulders, some willing, many trembling. You realize the boots that crush grime into these cobblestones are polished with resources that never belonged to this land or this empire. The wealth that floats in crystal glasses originated far from this table. The tea that warms evening conversations grew in soil that never asked to bend to orders. Victorian England prides itself on power, but power always has a source. And here, the source wasn't local. It was global, extracted, shipped, consumed, and rarely thanked. You don't remember when the footsteps behind you stopped being coincidence. Maybe it was earlier, when you navigated dim corners desperately avoiding the wrong attention. Maybe it was when the smoke stung your eyes and you paused too long under a lamp, breathing the era like punishment. But the moment of realization arrives like cold fingers on your spine. Someone has been following you. Not a pickpocket this time. Not a desperate child looking for a distraction to exploit. The deliberate pace tells you enough. This is official. You turn a corner, hoping to outwalk suspicion. But Victorian England is a maze, and mazes are built to confuse the lost. When you finally stop, the voice comes sharp. Hold there. No yelling, no dramatic chase. Just the crisp authority of someone used to obedience. You turn slowly, and the officer approaches, tall hat, heavy coat, expression trained to neutrality. He looks at your clothes, your lack of papers, your refined yet misplaced tone, and most suspicious of all, that you belong to nowhere anyone can identify. Here, being unidentifiable is practically admission of guilt. The questioning begins quick, repetitive, designed to shake what you don't know. Isn't suspicious. What's your trade? Where do you lodge? Who speaks for you? Every answer you give creates more confusion. You're a traveller? From where? You pause too long. Mistake. Your name isn't documented anywhere. Mistake. You explain you arrived on foot, without luggage, without endorsement. Mistake. 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 His expression doesn't change, but the conclusion solidifies in the cold night air. You're a vagrant, a criminal without committing a crime, a threat without making one. Before you protest again, the officer grips your arm, not painfully, but firmly enough to remind you that choices have been removed from the menu. A mainstream historical fact surfaces grimly. Victorian England criminalised unemployment and homelessness. The Vagrancy Act allowed arrest simply for having no visible means of support. Freedom demanded proof. Proof demanded status. You're escorted through darker streets where the fog seems thicker, or maybe fear adds layers to the air. People glance, then quickly look away. Respectability is fragile, and eye contact with the arrested is social contagion. When you reach the station, a squat, stern building, the smell greets you first. Sweat, mildew, damp straw. Another officer takes your name, which you give, and writes it phonetically, guesswork becoming your new legal identity. They place your belongings, which by now consist of almost nothing, into a box. A single item draws attention. Your phone. To you, it's normal. To them, it's witchcraft. What manner of device? Their fingers don't dare touch it. Instead, they wrap it in fabric like something radioactive, the Victorian version of a biohazard protocol. The officer mutters a religion-tinged concern, not loudly enough to accuse you of sorcery, just enough to acknowledge the possibility. When you're led to the holding area, the dimness inside makes the outside fog seem friendly. Straw mats on the ground, wooden benches against stone. A narrow window near the ceiling lets in a sliver of light that seems too weak to try reaching the floor. You're locked inside, and Victorian England finally closes its hand around your fate. A man sits in the corner, head bowed. Another rocks gently, humming a tune that sounds like memory breaking. Someone coughs violently, the sound thick and wet. You instinctively shift away. Illness here shares space, time, and opportunity. You strike up conversation with the man nearest you, whose beard looks older than his eyes. He was arrested for debt, a crime that creates prisoners who can't repay because they're imprisoned. The logic twists like a rope ready to snap. Another prisoner explains he was arrested for arguing with a factory foreman. Not for violence, not for damage, simply for defiance. Here, disrespect is disorder, and disorder is offense. The hours stretch, or maybe your mind stretches to fill them. The air is stale, carrying sweat and sickness. You try to sleep, but the straw scratches like thorns, and the stone beneath holds cold deep enough to numb your spine. Victorian justice is swift in accusation, slow in resolution. Morning arrives not with sunrise, but with footsteps and keys. They open the door and call your name or their misspelled version of it. You're led to a magistrate's room more functional than grand, furnished with wood, scarred by decisions. The magistrate reads your offence in monotone: loitering, no employment, inability to identify property or residence. You attempt to explain again, but explanation sounds like fabrication here. Truth becomes suspicious when it falls outside shared experience. Historians still argue whether Victorian justice leaned toward order or oppression, whether strict laws maintained stability or simply punished poverty. The answer changes depending on whether one reads from the bench or the cell. Your sentence is short but not insignificant. 7 days detention, a test of humility, usefulness, silence. They place you in a work cell, where tasks are assigned to pass the time-breaking stones, cleaning yards, weaving rope from strands that cut into your fingers like regrets. The work numbs the mind before it numbs the body. Meals arrive in tin bowls, porridge with the personality of wet chalk, bread sturdy enough to build with, water tasting faintly metallic. Hunger argues with dignity, hunger wins. Days blur the same tasks, the same walls, the same coughing echo down corridors. You start losing track of how long you've been here, days measured not by sunrise but by the scraping of tin spoons. You're released quietly, no belongings except what remained when suspicion took inventory. The street greets you without welcome, because Victorian England believes forgiveness is expensive and rarely offered. As you step back into the smoke, the fog, the rules, something inside you understands. In this era, crime doesn't destroy you. Circumstance does. And justice here doesn't require guilt, only existence. Night softens the city again as you walk, recently released but not truly free. A different kind of pressure hangs in the air, one less visible than police patrols but heavier than the fog. Victorian England may treat disease, labour, class or law harshly, but romantic expectation is its own unforgiving machinery. You find yourself near a small park, where couples stroll with proper distance between them, chaperoned by mothers, aunts, siblings, anyone whose presence guarantees morality. Even holding hands is scandal unless rings shine on fingers. A mainstream historical fact unfolds. Victorian courtship was a supervised ritual, not exploration. Marriage wasn't always about love more often. Economy, alliances, class preservation. The heart was consulted only when convenient. You observe a young man awkwardly, offering a flower to a woman whose expression hovers between hope and fear. Not fear of him, fear of consequence. Accepting means something. Rejecting means something. Everything means something. You overhear a conversation, a mother advising her daughter on the critical criteria. He must provide. He must be respectable. Affection may come later. Romance's strategy here, quieter than war, but equally tactical. You glimpse a well-dressed woman near a fountain. speaking softly with a man not dressed to her standard. Their conversation carries urgency, disguised as calm. They stand too close for etiquette, too far for secrecy. When a passerby glances, they separate instantly, distance measured in social survival, not space. Historians still argue whether Victorian romance was repressed or simply restrained, whether longing thrived under pressure or suffocated behind lace and expectation. Then comes the paradox literature of the era, bursts with longing, poems drenched in passion, novels pulsing with forbidden desire, characters confessing love society wouldn't permit the authors to voice aloud. You feel the weight differently depending on gender. Women face the greatest risk, reputation snapping like thread under tension. A rumor travels faster than locomotives and has fewer brakes. A perceived impropriety can exile without trial. For men, choices are wider, but consequences still exist. A wrong marriage can drain fortune, taint lineage, ignite scandal. You wander into a quieter garden where a couple sits legally, safely engaged, discussing their future with a mixture of hope and practicality. They're happy, genuinely, but their conversation includes phrases like, "when the finances permit," "if father approves," "when society accepts." Love here rents a room, duty owns the house. A quirky cultural detail flickers. Victorians developed complex love. Language through objects, a fan held a certain way, a flower type, a glove dropped, purposely signaled interest or rejection. Romance became a code and heartbreak, a translation error. You imagine yourself courting here, planning conversations like chess moves, waiting days for letters carried by horses instead of notifications carried by satellites. You imagine falling in love slowly, deeply, but with guardrails. As you leave the park, a wedding party passes, horses decorated, ribbons fluttering, faces composed with joy and responsibility in equal measure. The bride's smile is real, but her posture reminds you that happiness here must also be presentable. Victorian England didn't forbid love. It contained it, shaped it, directed it. Love was allowed as long as it behaved. You walk on, reflecting quietly on relationships forced to fit corsets tighter than fabric ever could. Tomorrow, if you were staying, someone might ask if you're single. The answer would shape your value, your opportunity, your destiny. But you're leaving this era not by choice, but by mercy, returning with a different understanding. You survived the fog, the hunger, the law, yet romance nearly suffocated you with rules. Because in Victorian England, love wasn't just emotion. It was architecture, and every heart needed planning permission. You take one last quiet breath in this world of soot and whispers, and as you exhale, the fog seems to soften around you. The distant hum of carriages fades into something gentler, almost rhythmic, like a slow tide brushing the shore. The gas lamps glow dimmer now, flickering like tired stars behind a blanket of cloud, and the cobblestones beneath your tired feet lose their sharpness in your mind. The city does not roar anymore, it murmurs. You sit still, finally still, and the night holds you with a fragile patience, as if even Victorian England has grown weary of its own weight. The air, though heavy, moves in a calmer current, carrying the faint scent of rain, wood smoke, and quiet homes settling into sleep. Windows shutter, footsteps disappear, and the last conversations of strangers melt into silence that stretches long and warm. Your body feels heavier, but not with fear now, with release. Muscles soften, breath slows. Thoughts drift like slow-moving boats across a fog-covered river, steady and unhurried. The echoes of factory clatter, frantic streets, hurried footsteps, they all dissolve, becoming ghostly impressions instead of noise. Imagine now, leaning back against the cool stone, letting your eyelids fall gently as the soft glow of lamplight turns amber behind closed lashes. The distant bell you heard not long ago seems like memory, not warning. Even the shadows feel calmer now, like they've curled up to sleep beside you. The journey was harsh. Yes, sharp around the edges, but here, In this final stretch of night, the world loses its weapons. The city exhales, and you exhale with it. Let the fog become clouds. Let the cobblestones become shoreline. Let the noise become nothing more than a hush. And as you drift slowly, quietly, peacefully away from Victorian England, the night carries you gently back home. You leave London not because you're ready, but because the city has a way of dismissing those who don't serve its rhythm. A rattling carriage pulls you toward the countryside, and for the first time since arriving in this century, the air thins, becomes breathable, almost gentle. Fields roll outward like green blankets, hills soften into curves, and stone cottages peek through hedgerows with shy charm. After the claustrophobic press of tenements, the countryside feels enormous, spacious in ways your lungs thank you for. Birdsong returns. You didn't realize how loudly silence had been screaming until nature began speaking again. The smell here isn't smoke. It's earth, grass, cattle, and manure, still pungent, but somehow wholesome. Trees sway with the wind instead of leaning from exhaustion, and rivers resemble water again, not industrial soup. But peace has its price. A mainstream historical fact reminds you, while city life was brutal, rural life meant isolation, low wages, and long agricultural days dictated by weather and landowners. Romantic poetry forgot to mention frostbite, crop failure, and working sunrise to moonrise. You walk through a small village, stone paths, thatched roofs, a single church towering above modest cottages like an overseer. The social rules are quieter here, less intricate, but more intimate. In the city, anonymity protects. Here, everyone knows what you ate for breakfast by lunchtime. Privacy expires faster than milk in summer. You pass farmers mending fences with hands thick as oak bark. Women carry baskets large enough to hide in. Children chase geese like it's competitive sport. A sense of togetherness thrives, but so does scrutiny. City gossip spreads fast. Country gossip spreads accurately. Another difference becomes clear: work. Hard labor in fields builds muscle but breaks joints. No steam machines thundering indoors, but oxen don't run on schedules, they move slowly, look at you judgmentally, and respond only to voices weathered by repetition. The land feeds its people, but only if the harvest behaves. You're invited to share bread and stew at a farmhouse table crowded with elbows and stories. The food tastes real, seasoned with patience, not preservatives. Yet every bite comes with implication. The harvest will decide whether winter is endured or feared. Farming is gambling with weather, insects, and hope. A quirky detail catches your imagination. Victorian farmers believed in weather superstitions like predicting fortune by the height of summer thistle or reading rain in the behavior of cows. Science here is part folklore, part observation, part inheritance. You walk along a dirt lane where wildflowers grow stubbornly through cart ruts. No roar of steam, no fog that claws your throats, but there is something else: slowness. Time itself seems exhausted, moving with lazy steps. Days take their time to unravel. The countryside offers space, air, calm, but fewer opportunities. Ambition has short legs when every mile is walked. If the city crushes with pressure, the countryside starves with patience. Choice shrinks. Dreams rely on inheritance, not achievement. Historians still debate whether rural Victorians were happier than urban ones. Were they freer, or simply farther from witnesses? Peace and poverty often share borders. It depends which window you look through. A gentle wind brushes your face, carrying smells of hay, wool, and something baking inside a kitchen out of sight. You exhale fully, the first complete breath since arriving in this century. The land doesn't feel hostile. It feels honest, brutally so. Unpredictable but transparent. In the city, danger hides behind corners. Here, danger walks across fields wearing weather on its face. Night falls differently in the countryside, darker, deeper, stars visible through unpolluted sky. The quiet wraps you like a heavy blanket. You lie on grass, listening to crickets instead of carriages. No shouts, no factory whistles, just nature humming its age-old lullaby. And as you close your eyes, you understand. The city tries to kill you quickly. The countryside does it slowly. Both demand something for your survival. Both ask whether you belong. You wake with a single resolve: leave. Not wander, not observe, not adapt. Escape. Victorian England has carved its mark on your lungs, your clothes, your outlook, your soul. You've tasted progress without safety, romance without freedom, justice without innocence, and survival without rest. The problem becomes painfully clear. Getting in was accidental. Getting out is deliberate. First, you follow logic, return to the riverbank where your journey began, hoping history allows round trips. The fog rolls thick, familiar now, no longer shocking. You wait. Nothing happens. No portal forms. No twist of time. You are simply another figure lost in haze. You try reason next libraries, scientific societies, scholars obsessed with time and space. You listen to theories spoken by men with pens instead of empathy. They debate everything except the possibility that the fabric of time might have seams. You attempt confession church pews creaking beneath the weight of impossible stories. The priest hears doubt, but not detail. You speak of the future in metaphors because literal truth would invite suspicion or a cell again. Redemption requires sin. Time travel isn't listed. So you try desperation. Trains become your symbol of escape. Steam engines promise motion, distance, change. You board one-headed anywhere that isn't here. But the further you travel, the more Victorian England stretches wide, rural, coastal, industrial, as if time itself refuses to release you. Inside the train compartment, silence settles. The rhythmic clatter of wheels against tracks becomes hypnotic. You stare through the window at landscapes rushing past, caught between eras like brushstrokes smeared across canvas. The train feels modern for a moment until smoke spills from the chimney stack like a physical reminder this is no dream of the future but the bones of it. A mainstream historical reality presses against your thoughts. Victorian travel was faster than ever before, yet still slow enough that distance was felt, not skimmed. Escape isn't speed. Escape is destination. And no destination here leads home. You consider telling someone the truth just once, but the consequences flash too clearly. At best, disbelief. At worst, accusation of madness, witchcraft, espionage. In a world still debating if germs exist, time travelers would not fare well. A quirky tidbit hits with irony. Victorians loved tales of time travel, serialized fiction about ancient Rome or distant futures. Yet the concept remained fantasy. H.G. Wells hasn't written The Time Machine yet. No stories exist to hide behind. But as days pass, something shifts slowly, subtly. You become quieter in crowds. You carry yourself like you belong. You no longer smile wrongly at strangers. You navigate markets without staring. You accept fog-like weather, not warning. Victorian England hasn't changed. You have. Escape starts feeling less like a route, and more like a decision not to leave land, but to leave mindset. History isn't exited physically, it's exited by learning. You stand again by the river at night when the world feels thinner. The lamps flicker, the fog parts, and for a breath, the city sounds distant, softened. Maybe time offers second chances only when it believes you understand the first. You close your eyes. Not with fear this time, with acceptance. The cobblestones beneath you feel less hostile, the air less choking, the silence less dangerous. When you open your eyes, you're either home, or you're someone who finally learned how to survive here. Either way, you escaped, not by leaving Victorian England, but by no longer being destroyed by it.